Good evening. My name is Anne Marie Varga. Thank you for joining Taking the Fear Out of Practice Ownership. Our speaker this evening is Jonathan Burns. The program is made possible by Bank of America. Before we get started, I would like to mention several housekeeping items. This program will last approximately 1 hour. If you are logged in with a phone or iPhone, please type your name in the chat box so we can verify your participation. Lastly, although you can hear and see the presenters, they cannot hear you. So if you have any questions, please type it into the Q&A feature and our presenters will be happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Meha Sheth, NJDA's new Dentist Committee Chair. She will say a few words before the presentation begins.
Hi, everybody. My name is Monica Sheth. I am your new dentist chair for New Jersey. Tonight we have another presentation continuing our content-based material for the year. I just want to make you aware of our social events coming up. We have both of them virtual. The first one is save the date for Saturday, April 10th at 3 p.m. We have a virtual pizza making class, and we will be sending you all the materials that you need. And second, we have Thursday, May 13th at 7:30 p.m. We have a virtual cocktail experience. That being said, we hope to see all of you there. To introduce our speaker, Jonathan Burns. He's the Division Executive of Northeast for Practice Solutions for Bank of America. And his presentation tonight is taking the fear out of practice ownership. Jonathan, it's all you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Sheth. And listen, I want to thank everybody for coming. We're beyond excited to be able to do this presentation for you. And as Anne Marie said, we're definitely going to leave some time at the end to make sure we answer all of your questions. A couple of things I would say too is if you have additional questions at the end, we'll also make sure that you have our contact information. We'd be happy to have one-on-one conversations with all of you. So, really my hope tonight is that I can just give you guys some basic ins and outs of what owning a practice might be, what it looks like if you're looking to buy or start your first practice. What I'll do, if you want to go to the first slide, Anne Marie. There we go. We'll go one more. Thanks. And so first thing I want to do is just give you a little bit of background on myself and then also on Bank of America Practice Solutions. So if you're not familiar with us or you've never heard of us before, we are the dental, medical, and veterinary specific lending arm of Bank of America. We also happen to be the largest dental practice finance company in the country, also the most established. We've been in business doing lending for dentists for over 25 years. We've also been a long-standing endorsed partner of the New Jersey Dental Association, and we really look at the NJDA as one of the best partners we have across the country. All across the country, we have over 25 endorsements from state and national dental associations, and that's one of the things that we're definitely proud about. A little of my background: I've been with Practice Solutions specifically in 14 years. So for all of those 14 years, I primarily focused on dental practice financing. For 10 of those years, I was one of our regional sales managers. So my role on a day-to-day basis was to engage with dentists to help them either start or purchase a practice. During that time, I helped over 1,000 dentists start new offices, and somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple hundred dentists help acquire practices as well. So I've seen pretty much every scenario I've possible. And for 5 of those years, I was actually our regional sales manager here in New Jersey. And now my role is I manage all of our regional sales managers for the Northeast and for the Mid-Atlantic. A few of the members of my team who cover the New Jersey territory are on this call as well. And I'll have an opportunity to introduce you to them at the end, at least virtually on our slide. So this first slide is really just Bank of America. We're better when we're connected. This is one of the slogans of the bank. And if you really think about that, for you as dentists, assuming that most of you are not practice owners, one of the things that you'll find out very quickly is that becoming a practice owner, you will need to be better connected. And we're going to talk a little about that today. So first thing I want to do is just kind of walk you through the agenda tonight. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by just talking about the benefits of ownership. And then after that, we're going to go into what the first time owner profile looks like. And so one of the reasons we do that is because I think many dentists assume a lot of things that may or may not be true, such as I have too much student loan debt to be able to buy or start a practice. And so we're going to go through some of those myths and talk a little about what banks look for to ensure if we're going to lend. And then we're going to get into purchasing a practice. We're going to talk about starting a practice. We're going to talk about credit and what that means to you if you're considering buying or starting up a practice. Finally, we're going to get into what a loan should look like, and then a growing partnership. And a growing partnership is how we're going to end, which is going to talk a little bit through the life cycle of you as a dentist. So this is a great slide that I like to talk a little about the benefits of practice ownership. Really, the first thing we're going to start from the left to the right here is, structuring the day versus a structured day. So when you own a practice, obviously you get to structure the day, how your day looks, whether you're, you may have a family and you need certain hours to maybe take your kids to school or not. And when you are a practice owner, it gives you the ability to do that versus when you're working for someone else, typically your day is very structured. So it's one big benefit of owning a practice. The next thing is building a legacy and the impact on the community. I think that this is probably something that many of you as young dentists probably isn't 100% in your mind when you're first getting started, because you really are, just worried about maybe paying your bills, getting a good job, understanding how you're going to make money in your career. But ultimately, what I'll tell you is that building a legacy and the impact on the community that you as a business owner can have is something that becomes significantly more important to you as you get later on in your career. Next benefit of practice ownership is controlling your industry. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean is that as a sole practitioner or an owner of your own practice, you're in control of your industry, as opposed to when you're working for a DSO, for example. That DSO is controlling your industry. And so the more and more DSOs that are out there and the higher percentage that they represent in any given market, the more they potentially control your industry. And so, again, owning a private practice gives you the ability to control your own industry. Business equity position, seems like a common thing, but it's something that we always like to bring up. When you own a business, and for many of you who know this, businesses have value, especially dental practices. They have a significant amount of value, more so than most small businesses out there. And so obviously a big benefit is having that business equity position. And then finally, we're going to talk about what's called the rule of 50. And I think this hopefully will open up a few of you guys' eyes on just the sheer numbers of owning a practice versus starting up. So let's get into that. So this is what we call the rule of 50. This is an income breakdown scenario. And again, every scenario is different. And so we're just canning a scenario here. So yours could be different, but let's start on the associate side of the screen here. Typical associate, you've been out of school for a year or so as a general dentist, not necessarily a specialist. You're producing somewhere around $50,000 a month, which equates to $60,000 annually. Most of you are getting paid somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of your collections, which is going to provide somewhere around $180,000 worth of income. So you tax that at 30%, that gives you a net of $126,000. As an owner, doing that same $50,000 a month, you're still producing $600,000 annual. However, the total revenue of your practice is higher. So one of the things that many people and many dentists forget to calculate, and when they're considering whether they want to stay as an associate or a practice, or I'm sorry, as an associate or be a practice owner, is the idea that when you're a practice owner, you also get the benefit of the hygiene revenue. So the total revenue, if you're producing $600,000 as a dentist in your practice, as a general dentist with on average, you're going to have around 30%, 33% of your practice is going to be hygiene production. And that's going to be added on top of your production, which roughly would give you a number of, in this scenario, $900,000. So out of that, the average general dentist is going to have a 40% profit margin, which means your total income is $360,000. Incredible. On on top of that, after you make your loan payment to the bank, so what we're doing here is we're factoring everything in. So of course, unless you're lucky enough to have the money to buy a practice outright, chances are you're going to need to come to a bank, probably a bank like us, to get the financing for the purchase of that practice. So take out the financing of what that would cost. You're making $272,520, taxed at 30%. That leaves you with a net income of $190,000 per year. That alone is significantly more than what you would make as an associate. So when you really look at that scenario, I think for a lot of people, it opens your eyes a little bit. So what we're going to do on the next slide, however, is we're going to take it one step further here. And so this is a 10-year comparison of what that looks like, and it's going to factor in a few different things. So as an associate, you have $126,000 of annual income over 10 years, no equity position in the business, gives you a total earnings over that 10 years of $1,260,000 versus as an owner, you're going to have an annual income of $190,764, which gives you earnings over that 10 years of $1,907,640. And then on top of that, over that 10 years, guess what? Your business is now going to be debt free. So not only did you make $1.9 million over that course of time, you also have a business that's paid off. And by the way, once you go past that 10-year mark, you're also not going to have the business debt service. So you automatically gave yourself a raise on top of having essentially a $1.3 million difference over that 10-year period. So when you really, I love this scenario when we first came up with it, and we first came up with these slides because it really gives you a great look at what the difference income-wise as well as asset-wise can be owning a practice versus working for someone else. So hopefully that gives you guys a good, setup for why you would want to be a practice owner. And again, takes a little bit of the fear of, would I be making more money? Will I be making less money? I would tell you in my career, after doing thousands of these things, in almost all cases, you make more money as a practice owner. We'll keep on going. So the first thing we're going to go is we're going to talk about the first-time practice owner profile, what a typical client looks like. So your associate work history, your income earnings, your student loans, your personal debt, and your cash and savings. For a typical client, your associate work history, most of our dentists who are coming to us as general dentists looking to buy or start up a practice have been in practice for somewhere between 1 to 2 years, sometimes longer, but on average, it's somewhere around that 1 to 2 year mark. Typically, we want you to have worked for at least 12 months out of school. But that's the typical profile. Now, what's funny is that's completely different. Well, I wouldn't say completely different, but significantly different from what it was even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the average dentist was, waiting to try and get into practice ownership until the 3rd, 4th, or 5th year out of school. A lot of reasons for that. I wouldn't speculate. I would say a lot of that might be, in my opinion, a lot of dentists are looking to they start working for a DSO, and a lot of times they realize that it's not all it's cracked up to be very quickly. So income and earnings, our average associate dentist makes somewhere between $120,000 to $140,000, and that's a typical client. We're completely good with that. Obviously, the higher income you have, the more attractive you are to a lender. So if you have the ability to make more income as an associate before you are looking to buy, that's definitely a good thing. And then student loans. So finally, it's very common on average, we're going to see most of our dentists who are looking to start up or buy a practice have student loans of somewhere between $250,000 to $400,000, sometimes less, sometimes more. And to be honest with you, we're okay with it. One of the things as a lender that we look at is what your monthly payment is. We're not necessarily concerned about the total amount of student loans that you have. And that's a very common myth until you hear it from a group like ourselves that specializes in dental practice lending. You really have a tough time. I think most dentists think that the student loans that they have is really going to inhibit their ability to be able to purchase a practice. So, and then finally, personal debt. What I like to go through here is just to give you an idea of what is good debt versus bad debt. We understand car loans, people are going to have car loans, even home loans. We're okay with that as well. We're going to factor those payments in when we're looking at your profile, but it's okay debt. The debt that we would prefer that you don't have is credit card debt or unsecured personal loans. So if you have the ability to keep that to a minimum, would very much suggest that. And then finally, the typical client cash savings profile. So for most of you as first-time practice owner, you're going to come to us with somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10% of what you're looking to borrow in cash. Obviously, the more you have, the better. I would say in a perfect world, if you have 10% of what you're looking to borrow in cash savings of some type, or it could be in stocks and bonds as well, that's okay. So for example, if you're starting up a practice for $500,000, we would, in a perfect world, we'd love to see you have $50,000. However, if you have 25, we're probably still, all things else being satisfactory, we're probably still going to move forward to do the loan with you. So that's a little bit what our typical client looks like. So you have an idea and a baseline of what we're looking for and what's typical. So that can kind of give yourself a little bit of barometer on whether you may or may not be ready. So, all right, purchasing a practice. So in this section, we're going to go through kind of what a high level overview of what purchasing a practice looks like. All right. So the first thing I like to go through is pluses and minuses or the positives and negatives of purchasing a practice. So we'll start with the positives. The positives, you have an established patient base. You have an immediate income stream, which obviously there's something to be said for that. So for the most part, when you purchase an existing practice as a general dentist, in general, the attrition of patients is very low. It's typically less than 10 or 15% attrition. So for the most part, all of the patients that are there now are going to stay as long as you don't come in and change a lot of things. That's one of the tips I would give you, that you can't, when you purchase a practice, it's very difficult to change a lot of the way that the practice ran all at once. So some more positive, the staff is trained, they know what they're doing, so you don't have to, in most cases, retrain them. The insurance provider's in place already, so the patients already know the types of insurances you accept, and you don't have to worry about setting that up already. And then also some of the positives of purchasing a practice is the potential for growth. So I think one of the things that I hear from many dentists I have and we talk to all the time is that they're looking for a practice as the potential for additional growth, additional work. I think one of the things I always hear is that many dentists who are close to retirement, a lot of times are leaving money on the table. So they have patients that may need a significant amount of work done, and they're just not doing it, or they're not diagnosing a lot of the things that you as a younger, more progressive dentist might be diagnosing. So, all right, let's talk a little about it. So that's the pluses, a lot of pluses. Let's talk about the negatives. So staff oftentimes is resistant to change. I think that's one of the things that a lot of new practice owners maybe underestimate, is that if the doc's been there for 30 years and the staff's been there for 30 years, They're used to doing things the way the doctor's been doing it for 30 years. And so for you to come in and say, listen, we're going to do things completely different because this is the way I want to do it. Oftentimes it can be difficult to make that change all at once. And so, the rule of thumb there is you really want to make small changes and try not to change everything all at once because they can be an issue. New owner patient attrition, obviously, like I told you a few minutes ago, while it's not common, I will tell you that that you definitely can see this. Specifically if you're really changing the way that the patients are used to being cared for. So office old and outdated, very common thing. One of the things that you'll find if any of you on this call have already been looking at practices to purchase, what you'll find is that the age of the equipment and the technology in the practice have very little to do with the value of the practice. Most of the value of the practice is going to be driven off the production, collection, and profitability of the practice. And so oftentimes that doesn't really give the seller an incentive to add new equipment into the practice. So, unfortunately, a lot of times you'll go in, be paying full boat for a practice, or, full price for a practice, and then you'll be forced to re-equip it within a year or two, which can definitely be a negative. So, that leads into the next negative, possible equipment upgrades. And ultimately you're, one of the other negatives, or it could be a positive, is you're buying a philosophy. So that dentist, their philosophy, may not be your philosophy, and it's sometimes difficult to change that right at the beginning. So those are some of the positives and negatives. All right, so this slide just goes through how to build purchasing power. And so the reason this is important is, especially for those of you on the line who are looking to buy a practice, one of the things that is very common for us to hear is, well, how do I become the best qualified dentist possible, or how do I have the ability to buy a $2 million practice if I want to buy a $2 million practice? And so there's really three things that we look at, and this is kind of the secret sauce, not only for us, but really any lender who's in our space and does loans for dentists to buy practices. So first one is debt. Will the amount of debt that I carry impact me? And so the answer to that is it could. What I would tell you is that when you're looking to purchase a practice, all lenders are going to factor in your monthly overhead. So they're going to look at how much money you have going out personally every month. And so the higher that you have, the higher amount of personal debt that you have, the more impact, the harder it can make it for you to purchase a practice, because that practice would have to live up to your income needs. And that's not something that a lot of people necessarily think about. I always make this joke when I'm talking to dental residents that, when you get out of school, the first thing you do should not be go to the BMW dealership or buy the $2 million house. Listen, everybody needs a car and everybody needs a house, but I would say moderation is the key. So second thing we look at that can help you build buying power is liquidity. And liquidity is total amount. It is the amount that I have in savings relevant, and it absolutely is. And so the reason it's relevant, it's become even more relevant post-COVID, is because banks like to see that you have a cushion, especially when you're buying a large practice. If you were to run into trouble, having cash in the bank can help you weather that trouble, can help you get through, whether it be a problem with the insurances and the collections. Because one of the things about owning an existing practice is that if you have a problem with your collections or a problem with your insurance collections, your overhead doesn't stop when your collections do. You can't tell your employees, well, listen, this insurance company decided they weren't going to pay me because we filed our claim wrong. No, your employees are going to expect to continue to be paid. So again, just an example of why banks, including ourselves, liquidity and the amount of money you have saved is important. And then how does my production affect my buying power? This is probably I would say the biggest of the three. when you're looking to purchase a practice, especially if it's a practice where the owner was doing a high level of production, we would like to see your ability to be able to do that production or do something close to that production. And the reason that affects your buying power is because if you can't, let's say, for example, you're buying a practice that produces $1.5 million a year, and the single dentist in there now is producing, 1.1 by himself with hygiene doing the rest. But you as an associate can only, or have only proven that you can produce $500,000 a year, for example. So what's the bank do? The bank, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to say, no, you can't buy the practice because listen, you haven't produced that. What it means is that the bank is going to assume that the production that you can't do, you'd have to pay an associate to do. And so what's that do? That is going to tighten up the cash flow for you to buy the practice. And so at the end of the day, if you have to pay somebody to do $600,000 of production, for example, that may not make the practice affordable for you anymore. So the more you produce, the higher your production as an associate, the more options it gives you when you're looking to purchase a practice. So that's an overview, how you build buying power. And those are probably the three biggest secrets if you want to know how to be a great buyer and buy the best practice out there. Those three are it. So this is purchasing practice production lesson. And in this slide, we're going to go a little bit more in depth into what the difference between $400,000 versus $700,000 in production is. All right, so this is a little bit of a lesson in what we call debt service coverage. So debt service coverage is a measure of the available cash to pay debt obligations. So in this case, you have $300,000 of income from the practice, and then you have $240,000 of annual business debt and payments, and that is going to give you a debt service coverage ratio of 1.25. So you have $1.25 coming in for every dollar that you have going out. What I'll tell you is that most banks, when they're analyzing your ability to buy a practice, they're going to want that debt service coverage to be at least a 1.2 or higher. So if it's a 1.5 debt service coverage, great. But if it's a 1 debt service coverage, not so great. So 1 debt service coverage would mean that you're only bringing $1 in for every dollar you have going out. You're at a break even. And I don't think anybody on this call wants to be at a break even in the practice that they're owning. So this is a very basic level of how a bank evaluates if you have the ability to purchase that practice. So one of the things that we do when we're looking at the income from the practice, excuse me, we're going to add back certain expenses that would be what's called pass-through expenses in the practice. And that's how we come to the $300,000 in annual income. And then when it comes to the annual business and personal debt payments, we're going to add everything, your payment to us, any of your personal payments, plus we're even going to throw a living expense on top of that, because on top of the bills that we can see, obviously everybody's going to have a living expense. So there's a lot of things that we factor in, and thinking back to the slide about buying power, that's why you really want to do everything you can to give yourself the biggest leg up when you're looking at practices, because every little thing that you do, whether it be excess personal debt or lagging on your personal production, those all can have an effect on your ability to buy that dream practice. All right. So the next thing I like to talk about, and again, with all of these subjects, I would love, for our purposes, we only have an hour together, but I could probably talk for 4 hours on all of this. So the next thing is purchasing a practice, building your team. And so one of the things that we feel is very, very important when you're looking to buy a practice is making sure you have built a team. We talked a little about that on the first slide. Here's, a classic example of really 5 people that you're going to need. You're going to need a banker. In most cases, you're going to need a practice broker. Some of you may get lucky and have a transaction where you buy a practice and the broker is not involved, but statistically, 90% of you on this call, if you buy a practice, your broker is going to be involved with you. And that's okay. Doesn't matter. Just like buying a home, you want a broker to be involved. The seller is the one who pays that broker, but the broker also represents the seller. So that's one of the things you have to remember is that you want your own representation. And so oftentimes that representation is going to be your attorney, your accountant, and then really a good insurance agent. And so couple things I like to hit on when it comes to the attorney and the accountant. Highly suggest that you have an attorney and accountant that specialize in dental. And so what I mean by that is they're across the state of New Jersey. There are more than a couple of these professionals that all they do is work with dentists to help them buy and sell practices. Same thing with accountants. The reason that's important is because they're going to be able to give you the specialized knowledge about the transaction. They're also going to help shepherd you through the transaction and help referee it a little bit with the seller's attorney and ensure that you know what's customary and what isn't customary when it comes to a dental transaction. What I would tell you is that dental transactions, especially purchases and sales of dental offices, have things that are unique to them as a business that doesn't apply to really any other business out there. And so that's one of the reasons it's very important to have professionals that specialize in the industry. So in this slide, we'll just go through a little bit of what the process looks like for purchasing a practice. And so really the first thing, pretty simple, begin your search. Start looking. A lot of times beginning your search starts with where you want to be. So if you're looking to buy a practice, you're really at the mercy of where that practice is located, because you can't, when you purchase a practice, you have to leave it where it is. You can't just, up and move it. So once you start beginning your search, you identify your opportunities. You then complete your due diligence. Due diligence is really a variety of things. That can also due diligence, and part of due diligence is making sure that you're qualified as a buyer. You're not necessarily applying yet, but you're making sure that you've talked to a banker. It's very important if you are looking to buy a practice, even before you've identified that practice, that you should be talking to a financial institution that specializes in dental and ensuring that you have the ability to get financed to purchase a practice. So after you complete your due diligence, you then want to execute a letter of intent. Oftentimes what I'll hear from dentists who've never bought a practice before is that they're trying to go straight to let's go straight to the contract. I'll tell you that's a mistake. Any good attorney that specializes in dental will tell you that it's important and it's going to save you a lot of time to do a letter of intent. What a letter of intent is, a letter of intent is going to lay out the basic details of the purchase and sale transaction, the important stuff. Because you want to agree before you start paying an attorney, before you get too far down the road, you want to make sure that you have the basics on the table and that you and the seller agree to those basics. So once you've executed the letter of intent, now it's time to apply officially for financing. One of the great things about the bank is that we're going to do the best due diligence out of all your professionals, because at the end of the day, once you buy that practice, you need to be able to pay us back. And so we have the second most vested interest behind you. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize, is that if you're really looking to know who has the most vested interest outside of you to help you, it's really the bank, because ultimately we need you to ensure that you can pay us. So once you have approval, you're going to finalize your contracts, sign your closing documents, and then start your transition. So that's a little of the process. Again, a high overview. So starting practice, we're going to get a little bit into this. I love both starting and buying a practice. I'd say I probably lean a little towards starting, just because I think it for those of you on the line that are creative, gives you an opportunity to really be creative and put that practice wherever you want. All right. So just like in purchasing a practice, let's talk a little about the positives and negatives. So the positives: choose your own location. Probably, as you've heard, I'm sure, for many years, location couldn't be truer. And not only for the business, but also for you personally, having the ability to choose where you put your practice can make you happier and which ultimately allow you to do better. And I think a lot of people, a lot of the dentists that I've talked to over the years, when they're looking at buying a practice, they underestimate the ability to be able to put a practice where you want it, and how that can be very different for you in your career. So you get to customize your layout. So meaning that you get to build that practice for today's dentistry. I think that's one of the things that many people forget, is that when you're buying a practice that was built 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was built for dentistry 30, 40, or 50 years ago. It wasn't built for dentistry today. And as I'm sure you're all aware, technology now is different than it was 10 years ago, 15 years, 20 years ago. And so a practice needs to be built for today's technology. So obviously, one of the major pluses of starting a practice is you get new equipment and technology. You get to hire and train the people the way that you'd like them to be trained. So you don't have to deal with old habits or folks that, again, going back to those employees that have been around for too long. So you get to hire and train the way you'd like. And ultimately, you get to build the culture that you desire. So you get to do all of that from the ground up. And that's a very entrepreneurial thing to do, is to build a culture that you want. So some of the negatives, finding your space can take time, especially in New Jersey. Space is at a premium, and sometimes that can be difficult. You have the stress of construction. If you have a contractor that specializes in dental, hopefully they make that stress a little bit less for you. But the reality is, construction can definitely be stressful. Beginning without a patient base, obvious, that is a negative, and it does take time to build your patient base. However, if you do a lot of things the right way, you can build that patient base very quickly. And you're going to have to continue to associate. So what I'll tell you is that almost all of our new startup dentists continue to associate for somewhere between 6 months to a year and a half after they buy the practice. And then finally, you're going to have growing pains with the staff. All right, so starting practice, your team. So the team, when you're starting a practice, is a little bit larger than what it is when you're buying a practice, because there's just more things involved. And so we'll start at the top and we'll kind of cruise around here quickly. So the first person you need would be a banker, a real estate broker. Very important to have a real estate broker involved. Many folks want to try and go find their own space. I don't suggest this. Attorney to help negotiate your lease and finalize the terms of your lease. Again, very important to have a dentist or an attorney that specializes in dental. They're going to know some of the clauses that you need specific in the lease to you as a dentist. One of the things that you have to realize is you're going to be investing more in this space than any other small business out there. And so it's very important, if you're leasing your space, to have it structured correctly. Important to have an accountant, architect. Typically, again, going back to the theme of dental specific, if possible, you want that for your architect and your contractor. An equipment specialist. Oftentimes, I think a lot of the newer dentists maybe underestimate having equipment specialists that you really trust. They're going to help shepherd you through the process, help you with the contractor, help you with the design. And ultimately, that company that you choose is probably also going to be the company that's going to help shepherd you through the whole life cycle of owning a practice, sell you your supplies, sell you your equipment as you need it, and service that equipment. So again, great equipment specialist, technology specialist, all important. Marketing company, very important. I would say this is probably the biggest area that many dentists run out of money, because they decide that they want all ADEC in their office, or they want all Sirona in their office, and they had to have the 3D cone beam. And so what goes? The marketing budget. Watch the marketing budget. You definitely need that. And then finally, HR consultant. Also something, some attorneys that you talk to will also be able to help you with HR, but there are some companies out there, HR for Health being one of them, that is a large nationwide company that specializes in HR for small healthcare practice owners, and specifically for dental. So insurance agents, again, talked about that before, important. So again, much bigger team when you're starting a practice than what you'll have when you're buying a practice. All right, so we'll go through kind of the high overview of what starting practice looks like. Establish a plan. Once you establish that plan, the first thing you're going to do is get pre-qualified. One of the things that is a little bit unique about starting a practice is we have the ability, because we're approving your practice through what we call projections, we can approve you up front before you even have a space. So you get pre-qualified, then you find your space. Once you find your space, then you establish your budget. It's very difficult to establish a budget until you know the size of the space, the scope of the space. And so you find the space first, establish the budget. Then at that point, you're going to finalize your financing with us. You'll also finalize your design. While you're finalizing your design, you're going to obviously be working on signing your lease. After you do that, you want to create a marketing plan and then start the project. So again, very high overview, a lot more detail on both of these. When we get to the end, I know that my team, I have a team of specialists, Jason and Dominic. Dominic specializes just in practice acquisitions, and Jason specializes just in startup financing. And so we'll make sure that you guys have their contact. They would love the opportunity to go more in depth on this process with you, and they'd be able to really break it down even more than what I have the time to do for you tonight as well. So, all right, starting in practice, budget breakdown. What does that look like? So here we're using a number of $500,000 as the average amount to start up a practice from scratch. Sometimes it can be more than that. Sometimes it can be less. We are flexible when it comes to the dollar amount. Here you can see we have $250,000 for construction, $175,000 for equipment, and then $75,000 for working capital. I'm not going to go real in depth in the budget here, but just want to give you a look of what a high level budget for a startup might be. We also have the ability, and you need the flexibility when you're building a practice to be able to switch this budget around. So you may need to adjust the amount of money you need for construction, to equipment, to working capital, and vice versa. And if you need to do that, you obviously want to make sure you have the flexibility to do that. So, all right. So finally, what we're going to get into is we're going to talk a little about, we went through the process of, so far we've talked about what starting practice is, what purchasing a practice looks like, what the typical profile for a dentist is. Now the next thing we want to get a little into is understanding your credit score. So again, high overview, credit scores range from 300 to 850. 850 is phenomenal. I've never seen it. 300, not that good. What I would tell you is that most banks, including myself, we're looking for you to have a credit score of 675 or higher. So that's definitely a good tidbit for those of you on the line. And then there are 3 credit agencies. There's Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. Some of you may know that, some of you may not. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that they are actually competitors. So they don't share information. And so oftentimes you're going to have a different score with each one of them. The scores are probably going to be similar, but they will be different. And then as you see below, we have the 5 different buckets that are going to affect your credit score. And so I'll just quickly kind of go through those. The first is pay history. So 35% of the way your credit score is calculated is based on you paying your bills on time. 30% of it is on the amounts owed in revolving debt. This is probably the biggest section that many people don't know. What that means is the amount of revolving debt that you own, or credit card debt for most of you, versus what your limits are. And so, for example, let's say you have a $30,000 credit card and it's maxed out at $30,000. So you're carrying a $30,000 balance. That looks negative on your credit score, and it has the ability to affect 30% of your score. Even if you're making that payment on time, because the amount that you owe is high relative to what your limits are. The rule of thumb is that you want to try and keep your available credit at 70% or more. So if you're carrying a balance on a credit card, you want that balance to be at 30% or less of what you have available, if possible. Again, not the end of the world. number one thing is making sure you pay it on time. But if you can keep that balance low, that's definitely a plus. Length of history, really nothing you can do about that besides just making sure you pay your bills on time for longer. Types of credit, so do you have some diversity in the types of credit you have? So a credit card, a car loan, a home loan. And then only 10% is related to credit inquiries. So I think a lot of big thing that I hear, a common myth I'll bust right now, is that having too many credit inquiries is going to massively affect your score, and it can. But again, it's not going to be a large percentage. So if you're shopping for a practice loan, it's okay to talk to a couple banks. It's not going to have a huge impact on your score. All right, so what should a loan look like? Again, just kind of got to go over this on a high level, but face-to-face contact, important. In today's world, this is face-to-face. So we'll call it the virtual to virtual contact. Industry experts. You always want to, if possible, look to a lender that specializes in your industry. They're going to know more about what you do, and they're going to be able to give you a better financing package. Fixed rate, you should always have a fixed rate. 100% financing. So you should be able to get 100% financing to buy or start up a practice in almost all cases. If you're not, or the bank's telling you they can't, you might want to question that a little bit. So flexible terms, can the bank offer you a longer term? So in the old school years, and pre-specialized lending for dentists, the typical business loan was only for 5 or 7 years, which is very difficult to borrow a large sum for that amount. In today's world, you should be getting 10 or 15-year terms to buy or start up a practice. Low fees, you don't want that bank to be charging you a lot of fees. It's very common for the bank to be able to charge you a lot of fees. No personal collateral. You shouldn't have to utilize like a home for collateral. You should only need your personal guarantee to be able to get that loan. So if the bank's asking or telling you that they need to collateralize a home that you own, I would question that because they shouldn't do that. And then finally, one of the things I think many dentists really don't consider is the opportunity for future growth. Can that bank help you if you're looking to own 2, 3, 4, or even 10 or 15 practices? Can the bank help you with that? And so you want to make sure that the bank that you're going with now to buy or start up that first practice has the ability to help you with what your long-term vision is. And most dentists that I talk to don't necessarily take that into consideration. So it's very important to make sure that you understand that the bank can help you in the future for everything that you need. So this is a little about the life cycle of business ownership, what it looks like. So typically you're going to enter the market for the first 3 years, your business plan, establish your culture, grow your patient base. This is also when you're managing your cash flow. The next 5 years after that, you're going to be growing. So you're expanding your services, increasing your staffing, growing your revenue. During that time, you're focusing on your employees and you're improving your business. And so that's really the first 7 years of owning that practice. And then, after that, for the next 10 years, you're really maturing. So you're managing your profits, you're streamlining your cash flow, really making sure that you're making that big money. And you also start thinking about succession planning. Am I putting enough money away? Am I investing my money properly? Am I doing everything that I need to make sure that I'm ready for that transition? And so typically you should start thinking about your transition, really 5 years at least before, what's your exit strategy, what your transition planning looks like, and really looking at retirement. And I know that's, you go through that and that's a quick, a quick, 20 something years. And again, it could be longer if you practice for 30 years. I met dentists who practice for 50 years because they love it and they still feel great. So, but that just gives you a snapshot of really what you can expect when you're looking at your career and the life cycle of what owning a business as a dentist can look like. So. All right. So finally, the decision: if you don't build your own practice, someone will hire you to build theirs. It's totally the truth. So never been a truer statement. And so you have to ask yourself, what do you want to do? You know, as an associate, you're unable to practice dentistry your way, no ownership responsibilities. You do get steady income, earning potential is likely capped, and no equity position in the bank or in the business for the most part. As an owner, you get to create your own culture, protect your profession, control your destiny, no income ceiling, and you get to get to affect your community. So I know out of these two, I would pick owner, you know, 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. But just a little final piece of information there. So these are your two local representatives. These are the two members of my team. I just want to take a second. Their contact information's here. We have Jason McKenzie. Jason is Vice President and Regional Business Development Officer who specializes in startup financing in New Jersey. And he can help you even if for some odd reason you're thinking about going somewhere other than New Jersey, he can still help you. But again, you know, if you're looking to start up a practice and you want to have that in-depth conversation, we would love to have that with you. I know what I did tonight was really just a kind of a quick overview of the process and hopefully some good information to get you thinking and hopefully get you excited about the prospect of owning a practice. And then finally, Dominic Ricciardi. Dominic specializes in our practice acquisitions. Literally, that's all Dominic does is helps dentists buy practices or who are looking to buy practices. So again, if you're considering buying a practice, Dominic would love to have an in-depth conversation with you. One of the things about what we prided ourselves on for 25 years is that you don't have to be ready to do it today, but if you want to have a conversation, we would love to just talk with you, help you through the process, give you as much information as you'd like, and give you all the resources you need, whether it be contacts for attorneys, for real estate companies. My team has all those contacts and they'd be happy to give them to you if you need them. So with that, I think we have 7 minutes left. So I'm going to, Anne Marie, do we have any questions in the Q&A?
We do have a few.
Okay, awesome.
Can you tailor some of the speaking points for specialists, such as an oral surgery startup?
Yeah, so we can talk. Yeah, well, it's a little tough now that we're finished, but if we had, you know, as an oral surgeon, what I would tell you is that the startups obviously process is a little bit different in the fact that when you're deciding where you want to go, oftentimes you're going to start by doing a detailed demographic analysis based on the area that may be beneficial or may have the need for an oral surgeon. And so one tidbit that I would give you as an oral surgeon is there are a couple companies out there that can start you with that process. One company that I like a lot called Dentagraphics. You can Google them. They have the ability to build a specialized demographic report to help you with areas that you may be interested. So you can pick, you know, say 5 different areas that you may want to be as an oral surgeon, and they can help you determine what the likelihood of your success as an oral surgeon would be in that area, starting a new practice. And so, you know, because obviously as a surgeon, most of your livelihood is going to be based off referrals, and so you know, figuring out where you're going to get those referrals from and understanding, you know, what area might be better than other would be really the big main difference and one of the things you would focus on. So, you know, hopefully that gives you a little tidbit there. So, all right.
All right, here's another one. In
Yep.
regards to production, what if you are working with a DSO that accepts lots of capitation plans that have no associate production associated with it? How does this get factored in?
Yep, that's a great question. So oftentimes we do come across associate dentists who don't have the ability to have access to the production or can't see their production. And so what we do in that scenario is we're going to look at your income. And we're going to determine, you know, what your income earnings are. We're also going to ask you about your daily procedures, if you're able to get a procedure list, just to get a feel for what you're producing as a dentist. What I'll tell you is that just because you don't have the ability to really show your full production, it's still not going to stop you from buying a practice. It's at the end of the day, while production is important and we like to see it, if you don't have access to your production, we still have the ability to give you a loan. It just helps us if you're looking to buy that, big practice. It helps us more to be able to show that production. So that's a great question. That's a common question that we get. So.
Okay. How long do you anticipate the current rates will stay low?
Great question. So here's what I tell you, rates are at historic lows. They have been since last year. We anticipate they're going to be great. I mean, while rates may move a little bit up over the next, call it 24 months, they're still going to stay great. I'll tell you a quick story. When I started in this business in 2007, rates to start up a practice were 8.5%. And so if we could give you 7.9, you were thrilled. And if you were buying a practice, we could give you 7.49, you were thrilled. And so, right now rates are in, the high twos, low threes. So we have a lot of room for rates to move and for them still to be historically great. I would also encourage you to not necessarily, while getting a good rate does give you the ability to pay less for the money that you're borrowing, and that is important. I would encourage you for that not to be the only factor in purchasing a practice, because there's so many other things that go into it. That would, if I were starting up a practice, I think the rate of the loan would probably be 15th on my list of things that I would be concerned about. So, good question.
Okay. How does financing change when you want to start a practice as a partnership, assume similar loans, debt, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when you're looking to start or even buy a practice as a partnership, you're still only going to get one loan. So the bank's going to give you one loan for that practice, and you're going to create a legal entity that you and your partner are owners of. So if you're going to go 50-50 and start up a practice, you're going to have a legal entity that you and your partner are going to be 50-50 owners of. And then the bank will give one loan to that legal entity. And so oftentimes I hear dentists who come to me and they're like, well, can we just get two loans? I'll get one loan, you get another loan. And that's not the way that it works. And that's really not the way that you would want it. You still get one loan. You just create the divide in the partnership through the legal entity. So, great question.
Looks like we have one more.
Okay.
Nope, two more questions.
Okay.
Do banks require production reports monthly after practice transition?
We do not. So after you bought the practice, we're not going to look at your production. It's really just a tool. The production reports initially are a tool just to help us help you buy the best practice possible. But again, every scenario is different. And so after you've purchased the practice and after you have the loan from us, we no longer require that from you. So.
All right. How do practice owners know when they can hire an associate?
Ooh, okay. That's an interesting question. How does a practice owner know when they got? Really, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, just because it's more of a practice management question. But oftentimes what I would say is that you'll if your schedule's full and you're at your limit with your ability to be able to produce, that can be one indicator. Another indicator, one of the things that we use as a bank to determine if you're ripe for expansion, is how much revenue you're doing per operatory per month. And so as a bank, we're going to say that if you're doing at least $13,000 per operatory per month, that your practice is in a position to expand. And so oftentimes it's not uncommon for us to see dentists that are doing $20,000, $30,000 per op in the practice. And so that can be an indicator that you're ready to expand, and that could be an indicator that you're ready to hire an associate. But that's probably more of an accountant question than it is a banking question. But hopefully that gives you some type of guidance there. So.
And then how do you know when to hire a specialist?
Yeah,
or when to add a specialist?
with that especially. Yeah, that's another good question. Again, probably more of a practice management consultant question, and concerns to, when should you bring a specialist into your office versus not. Um, if you were to ask me my opinion, I mean, most of the practices who have full-time specialists, if you're a general dentist, are producing north of 1.5 to $2 million per year. And you have to be busy enough to be able to give them consistent work because, for example, if you're looking to bring in an oral surgeon, you have to be able to fill that oral surgeon's schedule up for a full day that they're there. Or if you're looking to bring in an orthodontist, you need to be able to provide a full day worth of work for that orthodontist and for you to be able to afford to have that specialist in your office. So what I would encourage you is to really consider, what would it, how many patients would you need to have that person there for X amount of days, 1 day, 2 days, whatever it is. That's really the barometer of what you would need to do. But revenue wise, that's kind of what I see. Good question.
It takes time to find space to lease. Can someone lock in a rate months prior to closing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do offer the ability to lock in your rate. Typically, we give the ability to lock in the rate for 4 months. So for most people, that tends to be enough time to be able to find the space and get far enough along to start dispersing the loan. And then, of course, we give you 10 months to fully disperse and build the office. So altogether, we give you 14 months between the finding a space and getting the office built out for your rate to be locked.
How do they look at buying into a practice?
How do we look at buying into a practice? So if you're buying into a practice, what we do, we look at it pretty much the same as purchasing a practice, where we're going to determine the cash flow that you're going to get from the percentage of ownership you would be taking over. So let's say you're buying 50% of that practice, we would determine the cash flow you would get from getting 50% of that practice. Then we would also want to understand how you're going to be compensated. So when you're buying into a practice, the partnership agreement and the compensation agreement needs to be clearly spelled out. What's typical for most partnerships is that you each are going to pay each other a salary based on your percentage of collections. So you get 30% of your collections, he gets 30% of his collections, and then you split, what's left 50-50 based on your partnership. I mean, that's just one scenario. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but we're going to ask to know what that is, and then we're going to factor that into your cash flow when we're underwriting your loan. So, good question. Looks
For
like
the
we're keep on getting questions, but
I think there's 3 more now.
okay, got it.
For the partnership question, do you qualify for more when it comes to a startup budget?
Do you qualify for more? You do, yeah. So if you're looking to start up with a partner, typically we'll give you somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 more than what we would give a single dentist, because typically your practice is going to be a little bit bigger than what you'd build for a single dentist.
When purchasing a practice, do you look at cash flow or gross collections when coming up with a valid purchase price?
Well, a couple of things. So one, I'm probably not the best to answer the question of what you would look at, how to evaluate a practice. But ultimately, anytime you're looking at a practice, you would look at the total collections on the tax returns for the practice. And so, whatever you want to call it, I guess, gross collections or collections, you're looking at the total revenue as it appears on the tax returns.
Have you ever said no to lending to purchase a practice based on some internal issue in the practice?
I mean, if it's brought to our attention, there probably have been situations where we have, but I mean, we wouldn't, as a bank, we're simply going to determine your ability to be able to afford that practice and what you tell us your ability is in the practice. When it comes to internal issues such as, if you're talking about like employment, employment, employee issues, or issues with, work that may or may not have been done in the office. We're not going to look at that. That would really be up to you to do due diligence. And there are people that can help you with that. There are practice management consultants that will help you do practice purchase due diligence for very reasonable fees. We'd be happy, like Dominic, for example, would be more than happy to talk you through that process and give you, the referrals to the right people.
Okay, final question.
Okay.
For a married couple of dentists, is it better to apply for the loan together or separate?
Ooh, depends on, so my answer to that is depends on if you want to own multiple practices. So if each one of you want to own a practice, his and hers, like you have your practice, he has his practice, then you would want to apply separate. If you're going to both own and work in the same practice, and that's what you want to do, and you're happy with that, then it would make sense for you both to be on the loan and owners of the practice. But what I would tell you is a lot of that's driven by ownership. So if you're if you're both going to be owners of the practice, regardless, you have to be on the loan. The only way that both spouse don't need to be on the loan is, let's say your husband owns a practice and he's the sole owner of that practice, then he can be the only person on the loan, and then you, the sole owner of your practice, you can be the only owner on your practice.
Okay, that's all the questions.
Okay. Well, listen, I think you guys, there's a lot of great questions, and looked like we had a ton of people who hung on here through the whole thing. So hopefully I was entertaining enough for everyone. We'd love to hear from you if you're interested in talking. Reach out to either of the guys on the screen. What I would tell you is please, if you reach out to us or the NJDA, please let them know where you found us from. So it's important to us for tracking purposes to know what people got out of this and their level of interest. That way we can continue to do programs like this in the future. So awesome. With that, I think, are we good?
We're good. Thank you, Jonathan.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.